Welcome back to Fucked Up Fables. If destroying your childhood is something you enjoy, you've come to the right place. Today we're going to continue down the line of Trickery for April, and I believe Titania is going to take us back down the rabbit hole of fairies, right?
Yes. I mean, what better place to go for trickery, because that's probably the most common trait across all of fairies.
True. They're kind of mischievous.
Yes. And my favorite thing is that cultures use fairies and their tricks to explain away very mundane things. As I was doing this, I ran across a fairy that causes items to slip from your fingers. So like if you just happen to accidentally drop a bowl, you didn't drop it. The fairy made you drop it.
Me, for a long time at work, I was cursed where no one could eat lunch with me except for very specific people, because if someone else ate lunch with us, then my food would just end up everywhere. Like, I would literally have my container and just drop it all over the floor.
It was the fairies.
It was. They're preparing me for the host.
And then there's fairies make you gossip, which I particularly enjoyed. There's fairies that make you impulsive, but the dark side of that is that they're stealing your free will. And then my personal recent favorite is there is a fairy that gives you anxiety. It sits on your chest, and that's that feeling you get when you're anxious and it's in your chest. It's because you can feel the fairy sitting there, and it just whispers things in your ear. And that's why your like thoughts circle and circle in your head when you have anxiety. It's the fairy whispering them in your ear.
Content warning for possible anxiety attacks.
I don't feel I need a content warning though. Like maybe,
some people, just talking about it like triggers.
Yeah, I guess warning for. I mean, that's the last mention of that. There is a slight mention of seduction, I guess, which could be a content warning.
Ooh, sexy fairies.
Death. There's mentions of death.
Oh, it's such a stretch now for us to think of something that could be in this.
We've been so gentle lately.
Why is Trickery Month the month where we're like, maybe a content warning, but not really?
Welcome to PG-13 month.
I already used our F-bomb, so,
But so yeah, there's a fairy out there for pretty much everything, and you'll find a lot of these fairies don't actually have names. Like my anxiety fairy doesn't have a name, which makes me sad. No, she does. She was called Anxious Annie. I forgot. Never mind. She has a name. But
mundane name.
Right.
I love it.
I actually chose 3 named fairies because named fairies tend to have a little bit more information about them.
Which makes sense.
So we're going to start with the Bodak, which I'm probably mispronouncing. And just a side note, I pulled this information together through a few sources, including Brian Froud, because he's awesome, and Emerald Isle, which is an Irish website. But not every story is Irish, just so you know. Also,
today, not every story is Irish? Ooh, okay.
Yeah, we go to 3 different regions. And then I will have links in the description. The Bodak was the companion of an old Irish goddess of the glaciers. I did not write her name down because I was not going to try to pronounce it. His appearance is that of an old man, often dressed as a farmer. Sometimes he's called the old farmer. But he's usually like very worn, like he's wearing rags. He is thought to be the father of the banshees because his appearance is often a sign of disaster or death.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he finds humans amusing and likes to play tricks on them, particularly children. These tricks are often the means for the disaster that his appearance foretells. He will come into a house through any unprotected crack, no matter how small. So the way to protect yourself from him is by lining windowsills, the hearth, the threshold, any unprotected opening with salt, with a line of salt.
That works for most fairies, correct? Where you just like cover whatever you're in with salt and
Most unseelie fairies. Yeah. So he's also the king of an alternate fairy realm, or like a pocket realm, where he invites some mortals to enter. This location is considered a paradise. There's no hunger, no illness, no death. It's a very intoxicating place where you go, you feel kind of drunk.
What's the catch?
And only select mortals are allowed to visit, and only those select mortals who survive the journey to his place. I did not find details about what that actually meant, survive the journey, but I guess it's a little difficult to get there. But in the end, it's a trick, because once you enter, time no longer has meaning. So were you there for an hour, a year, or a lifetime, you won't know until you decide to leave. Because as soon as your foot touches the ground of the mortal realm again, every year that has passed will immediately fall on you. Maybe,
oh my gosh.
yeah, maybe you're lucky and only age a decade or so, but more often than not, your body will shrivel and turn to dust where you stand.
Wow. Now, are you like aware that you're in there and can leave, or is it like a not necessarily like that time has passed, but like you're in there and then you're like, oh well, it's been a little bit since I've seen my family, let me leave? Or is it like more in like movies and stuff where like you don't realize you've been there, like you're like, oh, I literally just saw them 2 minutes ago?
So you know you're there, so because like you set out to go, and you know when you get there, and like you know where you are, but you're so like enraptured by everything. It's kind of like when you go to a really good party and drink a little bit, you know, don't pay any attention to the time. Next thing you know, the sun's coming up. It's kind of like that.
Okay.
So you go and you can be like, wow, this is so awesome. I'm just going to enjoy a night here. And then I'm going to bring my family because this place is great. But 100 years have passed.
Okay. It's not like entering the land of the Lotus Eaters where you literally forget.
Yeah, you don't forget. No, it's a little intoxicating and you enjoy it. And people do, like, they always leave. Like, there comes a time where they want to see their family. A lot of times they want to bring their family to this realm. They always leave. And I think that's kind of the point, because this fairy what he finds most amusing about humans is that we attempt to do things in our short amount of life, because he's mortal. And he's like, look at these humans scrambling about trying to do these things. So he takes them over into this realm, watches them for a while, and then enjoys watching them leave. So, and then seeing what they do.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. See, he started off so nice, talking about children and stuff, and then
he liked to trick children to their doom.
Yeah, apparently. Well, I mean, I guess if you never leave, it's not doom, but
he'll come. So like one of the things he likes to do is he will come into a house while they're sleeping and go to the children's room and like poke them. So he's like, on one hand, he's just so like benign, and then on the other hand, he's like, yeah, come to my realm, we'll see what happens.
So he's literally the monster under the bed that kids imagine.
That's actually a different fairy.
Really? That's terrifying.
Yeah, I ran across that fairy when I was looking for other fairies I want to talk about. There's a specific one, lives in closets and under your bed.
I am so glad that Celine is not in this episode today, y'all.
So the next fairy I want to talk about comes from Scotland. So we go from Ireland to Scotland.
Okay.
It is the Fideal. This is a water fairy that resides in fresh water lakes and bogs in the Highlands. Okay. It looks somewhat humanoid, often taking on the appearance of a young woman. And like the coloring of what you would imagine in these places. So like dark gray skin, maybe tinted with some green. She may have moss growing on her because she's living in these boggy sort of areas. But she is the embodiment of loneliness. So the Fideal will come out of the water at twilight or the in-between hour and wander the edges of their home, singing a sad but irresistibly seductive song as she searches for a lover. Very siren-esque. And I did want to make a point, because I don't think I've ever explained this in our fairy episodes before. The gateway to the fairy realm is, or I should say, like, where the two worlds meet and the wall is the thinnest, is something called the in-between. This area can be anything that's in between something. So like a doorway, which is in between two rooms, which is why there's legends about people going from one room to another and then not making it to the other room because the fairy snatched them in the in-between.
Okay.
Or it could be an area between two trees with branches that intertwine to create like a natural arch. It can be a time of day, so sunrise, sunset, noon, or midnight. It can be a time of year, such as equinoxes, or the midnight minute between a season. So that's what I mean by, like, she comes out twilight during the in-between, because that's where the veil falls, essentially.
I wonder if talking about the trees and archways, I wonder if that is where the superstition of don't break the line, don't split the pole comes from.
Don't split the pole.
Don't split the pole. It's where, like, you're walking next to someone and you come up to a pole and there's like the superstition that you should both walk to one side rather than walking separate sides.
Yes, because you're creating an in-between.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now there's an in-between with the two of, yeah. So it's interesting because, yeah, you can create an in-between. I actually joke all the time. There's this way that we walk, and we have to walk under these power lines that kind of do this, and it's like a triangle. And I'm like, I'm going through the in-between. And so, but it's a little different than fairy rings or fairy circles, like a mushroom circle, because those aren't really in between. Those are actually just traps.
Yeah.
So those are meant to be like a doorway. These are just places where fairies tend to lurk, and they say that, like, if you're looking at an in-between place and you turn your head out and you look out the corner of your eye, you can glimpse a fairy in an in-between. Pretty cool stuff.
So I wonder, so they're able to, okay, question. So you talk about doorways. Fairies, I have to ask 15 million questions. So, like, if the door is closed, is that no longer an in-between?
It's no longer an in-between, though.
Okay, so it's only when it's open, so like a doorway. Okay.
Right, because when the door is closed, it's no longer technically in between two rooms, you're completing a wall. But when the door is open, that archway, that little bit of space is technically not in either room. It's in between. So that's the space. And that applies to anything you can think of.
That's a lot.
Tricky little bastards.
Yeah, they gotta find a way to get in somehow.
Yep. And there's a lot of, like, folk tales and warnings and stuff out there about people being snatched in the in-between. So fair warning next time you try to leave the room.
You're gonna have me line my entire house with salt now.
I'll protect you from the unseelie, but not the seelie.
But isn't the unseelie the ones that you really need to look out for more than the seelie?
Depends on your type of torture.
I mean, true, the host, come on, that's once a year. I think I'm good.
Anyway, so much like a siren, she will use her song to draw in an unsuspecting man. By tricking him into believing that he has found his soulmate. And she will hold on to them and comfort them and make them feel safe as they're being dragged below the water. But once the life leaves the body, she abandons them on the lake bed, completely forgets they ever existed, and then rises to the surface the next day and does it all over again.
So, question. I know we've talked about this before, that fairies aren't necessarily, like, inherently evil. Is she intentionally killing them, or is she, like, truly wanting to be with someone, they just can't live in the water?
This one's interesting because this is one of the fairies that in Scotland they label as an evil spirit.
Okay, so we believe that it's intentionally killing people.
So yeah, it depends on, she's only interested while they're alive, and she lives in the water, so she takes them home and then they die and she's like, oh, need to find another one. Think of it this way. So, like, some areas with fairies do have the good evil alignment. Irish fairy tales don't really have that. It's more of like a chaotic neutral sort of thing. Where in Scotland, and apparently in Scotland, they have good and evil, or I should say benign and evil spirits. This one actually falls under a subclass of fairy, which is a malevolent fairy subclass.
Okay, interesting. The reason that I ask is because in Scandinavian folklore, there is a creature known as the Nox or the Nix. And it is essentially the same thing, except it's a man who plays a violin in the water and ends up luring women in. Yeah,
Okay.
but they don't do it to like intentionally kill them. It's just that them playing is so enchanting that
They just
people
happen to go in the
reward
water.
Yeah. So like they don't intentionally do it, but like it's like a weird gray area. They know what they're doing, but they're not doing it intentionally.
I almost chose one because it's a man, and I thought it was interesting because you always hear about sirens being female, because that's what I essentially consider this as a type of siren. Everyone has their water fairy tale, but there's one, and it's a guy, and that sounds really, really familiar.
It might be. I know that they have other names. I'm just more familiar with the Nox /
Glanconer?
Maybe that might be like a different region's name for it. Does he play like
Irish?
Does he play a musical instrument?
Glanconer or love talker. Beware, dealing with the love talker involves a risk, an elemental risk. It might be exhilarating experience treasured for the rest of your life. Ooh. No, it says his words are sweeter than honey. He walks the woods by twilight, prowling for women to charm and kiss.
Yeah, no, that's a little bit different. I think in Scandinavian folklore, it might be a little bit more typical like Irish, where they're not good and evil, kind of like trolls, like trolls are seen as evil because they take your kids away, but they don't like hurt your kids. They literally just kidnap your kids to raise as their own.
Yeah, this was interesting because that's all he does is wants to kiss a human girl, but it leaves the human girl pining for him, and no human man touch can ever compare.
Interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, in this short and sweet episode, I thought we could talk about one of what I think is probably one of the most well-known tricky fairies.
All right, most well-known fairy.
Tricky fairy.
Tricky fairy. Most well-known tricky fairy.
At least the name. Maybe people don't realize it's a fairy.
I'm trying to think, and the only thing I can think of is Tinkerbell.
They do appear in media across the board. I'm pretty sure I've seen them in the cartoon Gargoyles. They take many different forms and have different skins. No. And they're even in Dungeons and Dragons.
Will-O-Wisps?
Yes!
They're also in Brave.
Yes, they are. They were leading you toward your destiny in Brave, weren't they?
I don't remember if that's how they really portray. They're really weird. Because they led her to. I think they lead you to. I don't know. See, I don't know Scottish lore well enough, but I feel like in Brave it was more specific, like leading you to what you desire most. Similar to along the lines of a siren, like a siren's going to tempt you with the thing you desire most.
Yeah. So that's wrong in Brave.
Yeah, which I'm like, I don't know. That's the way I interpret it, because that's why
they were nice in Brave. I remember them being nice.
Nice is a little interesting of a term, because they lead her to the witch, which is what turns her mom into the bear and causes all of the problems. But
that's what she needed.
That's not what she needed, but it's what she wanted. She wanted her mom to change, which is why they led her to the witch. But then at the end, she's wanting to save her mom, which is why they lead her again through the forest.
Yeah, that's not right.
So that's why I think it's more like a siren thing. Like, yes, the siren wants to tempt you so that they can eat you, but
My camera went out. Sorry.
what they do is they just like show you the thing that you want most in the world. That's how they tempt you.
Still very benign.
Yeah, it's a weird they're not like, I think, intentionally trying to hurt you, but like what they're leading you to may not be a good thing.
Well, they're actually called spunkies in Scottish folklore.
Interesting.
Yeah. But they're found actually all over the world. Everyone has a different sort of description. But I thought that the main one I would focus on is the one in Britain. So that we've gone Britain, Scotland, and Ireland.
All of the UK.
I just need Northern Ireland, UK, but I just need France, and then I can feel like the Tudors, King of England, what does he say? King of Ireland, England. I forget it now. Never mind. I take it back. I'm pretty sure he says King of Scotland, Ireland, and France or something in his title. Whatever.
Why France? I know that's unrelated.
So, they actually owned Calais, and so it's part of France, and so essentially it's kind of a bragging thing, and he forever proclaimed himself King of France, even though they had a French king over there, and then he loses Calais. I always pronounce it wrong.
Weren't they all cousins anyways? So
yeah, I think so. Actually, his sister married the King of France, and then the King of France died. Yeah, so there's that story too.
Yeah, I know that most of Europe is in some way related. Usually it's distant cousins, but that's like a big thing. Is they're like, oh yeah, by the way, they happen to be the cousin of this really famous ruler, and you're like,
yeah, pretty much. So anyway, we are talking about British Will-O-The-Wisps. So a Will-O-The-Wisp will appear as a small ball of light, often in the distance. They appear to travelers walking on paths at night, and the harder you try to catch up with them, the farther away that they get. A lot of times travelers will think that it might be a campfire in the distance or lights from the next town over. And so the unsuspecting traveler will follow it thinking that's the right way to go, and they'll be led from the safety of the path. But the Will-O-The-Wisp is not just this random glowing ball like we see in Brave. It's actually called fairy fire, and it's held in the hand of a puka, or a small goblin. Sometimes it's just like a ball of like fairy fire that he's holding. Sometimes it's actually got a lantern.
interesting.
But this goblin purposely wants to trick the traveler into following him for no real reason whatsoever, besides to lure him far away from the path, then jump out of nowhere and go, ha ha, blow out the light and run away.
I love it.
He often leads travelers into a bog or a marsh, which is actually important to a scientific point later. But
oh, I remember you talking about that.
This is the one fairy that we have scientific evidence of.
Yeah, I remember you talking about this. Interesting.
So that's the British version of it, and actually a lot of areas around the world, they're relatively harmless and don't really cause harm. But in Scotland, they purposely lead people to destruction, because they're often seen as omens of death and are considered perhaps sometimes to be the spirits of the dead. Oh, that's like Brave is like quiet. Right?
Yeah, that's what they are in D&D. That's what they are. They're the souls of the of people who die on a battlefield. That
pretty sure in World of Warcraft, when you die, you become a Will-O-The-Wisp.
Yep, you do. And you have to run and find your body.
Interestingly enough, they're less destructive in Sweden, where they're thought to be the souls of someone who is unbaptized. And instead of trying to lead people away into harm, they're actually trying to lead a person to water in hopes that they can become baptized and move on. But it'll never happen because they're not like physical beings. You can't baptize them.
Right.
So they're just in this forever cycle of wanting to be baptized.
That's actually kind of sad.
Yeah. There's actually one in Argentina where it's the devil and they glow red. So there's that.
Interesting.
What I was talking about, like science earlier, is that my fun fact, it is thought that Will-O-The-Wisps are actually just stories created around a real phenomena that happens across the world, particularly in bogs and marshes. There's this thing that happens where things decomposing in the marsh create gases which have no real place to go. And so it builds up because like the water and stuff is so thick. So this gas builds up under the water, or under the marsh or whatever it is that's there, and then eventually gets pushed up and released. And there's a chemical reaction that happens that creates a bioluminescence, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and creates flashes of blue light or bulbs of blue light. And you could actually go online and see like pictures and videos of it. It's really freaking cool. So it's thought that this phenomena was happening and people were seeing it and following it, and that's where they get their stories from, is from that.
Interesting.
And it's not like long burning, but typically when it breaks the seal, you'll get several that happen, so it can look like it's moving away and actually traveling.
Or like a trail. Oh, okay. See, this is kind of cool. I like it.
There's also the theory that ball lightning, particularly with the stories in Australia.
I have experienced ball lightning in Miami, and it is literally terrifying.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it sounds like not real stuff, but essentially, literally, as you've seen, a ball of lightning that just happens. It has to do with static or something in the air. Yeah, it happens around
air pressure change or whatever.
Yeah, it can happen in jungles quite often. And then, if I remember correctly, Australia was one where they were saying ball lightning might be the reason for it. But there are people who do disagree that maybe that wasn't it, because they don't look like little balls of light. I mean, maybe ball lightning, but like the bog glow doesn't necessarily look like balls of light. But
I mean, I guess it depends on like how old you are and how far away and like what's obscuring you. I could see, or like, even if it's not a ball, just like that's the like closest association you can make when describing it to somebody.
True. And weirdly enough, way back in the day, England was a lot mistier and foggier. I'm not talking about like the British fog of like the industrial age, but like it was a more wet climate and it would have a lot of like misty, foggy days. And I can imagine that light through fog looking like
like an orb or something. Yeah.
Oh, and I have one last fun fact about Will-O-The-Wisp. In Denmark, they're called jack-o'-lanterns.
I love it.
Yep. I just thought that was neat. And I was like, wait a minute, is that why we have jack-o'-lanterns? Because I know that the Puritans went from England to somewhere before they came here, and I was like, was that Denmark? No, they went to Holland. I was really excited. I was gonna be like, is that what? No, I went to Holland. So it must be a different jack-o'-lantern story.
A lot of people confused Denmark and Holland, so
I did.
Because that's where a lot of people get confused when they talk about the Danish and the Dutch, and they're like, wait, what? And it's like, the Dutch are from Holland, the Danish are from Denmark.
Yeah. But I guess the interesting connecting thread of the Will-O-The-Wisp is they're not considered to be necessarily like super thoughtful creatures, you know, like a man with a plan sort of creature.
Right.
But they seem to be like very simplified. Like the people who aren't baptized, they have one thought in their mind, is to get baptized. They just keep reliving this cycle. But then you have, you know, the puka that it's just a goblin that's a little jerk.
All I think of is Puka from Anastasia.
Oh yeah, the dog. That's all he has.
That was really cool. See, when you talk about fairies, I never know what to expect. I'm like, I don't know what fairies we're about to talk about. And then
it could be Anxious Annie. That's my mascot.
My mind races with all the possibilities, and I'm like, I've literally forgotten everything. I feel like SpongeBob when he like has to forget everything to learn like that one thing for Squilliam, and then they ask him like, "What's your name?" and he's like, "What's our name?" and it's like internal because internally they were like burning everything that wasn't important, and so like they literally burned his name. So he's just sitting there, and he's like, because he like doesn't have the knowledge anymore. And I'm like, that's me every time you talk about fairies. I'm like, I know this stuff. It's gone.
Yeah, never liked SpongeBob. I still hate it with a passion. I do appreciate the SpongeBob makeup collaboration though, because they made like a makeup sponge shaped like SpongeBob, and I'm like, beautiful.
There are so many good jokes in SpongeBob. Like, SpongeBob really went out there and like they have straight up cannibalism in SpongeBob. I mean, like they go way out there with some of the stuff they do.
We have cannibalism too.
We do on most of our episodes on this channel.
But yeah, that's all I have. So
yay!
What are we doing next week, Q?
So next week I originally was gonna talk about a Polynesian demigod who's really famous because he's in the movie Moana. I was gonna talk about Maui, but you need to watch Moana.
Yeah, it's on my to watch list. I'm too busy with Doctor Who again.
Moana is such a good movie. Oh my god. I could fawn over it all day. Anyways, but then I was thinking about it. You can keep this in if you want. And I have a script already made up about some mythological creatures that really fits well into this, but it's Greek. And I said I wasn't going to do Greek, but I kind of really want to do that one instead. And then I could just save Maui for Disney month and talk about Maui and Moana.
That makes sense. I like that plan.
Good.
You like, so I broke my promise.
Yeah, and the mythological creatures I'm talking about are very tricky. The whole script is tricky.
Though. But there was that one in that Greek thing. Fuck Sphinxes.
It's actually the one where I talk a little bit more about Daedalus, not Icarus, but Daedalus. I talk a little bit about him in it. So
fun.
I know. I'm kind of excited. So I think that's what I'm going to do because it's already written up. It's done. And then that gives me more time to like, I can do the Maui. I can do the Moana comparison to the actual mythology because that's the only other Disney mythology movie out there. So.
Yeah. Unless you consider King Arthur to be.
I already did that though. Remember I talk about sort of
Watery Tarts. That was episode 1.
Yeah, the very first one I make specific mentions of that movie. Yeah.
I think we did it. I think we're done.
I know, I'm like, dang, there ain't much. Which is fine. I mean, unless you want to count like Atlantis, because they made like their own mythology for it, and like it's talking about a mythical place.
Such a good movie.
I could
mythical could have existed.
I mean, there are people who spend their whole lives trying to prove what Atlantis was or where it was. So.
But yeah, that's all I have.
Yeah.
See you next week.
Bye.